Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is strength and weakness. But first, I want to apologize for the late start. I was encountering some technical issues, but we made it. So what we're going to be talking about is how the seeds of our greatest strength is often found in what we perceive as our weaknesses or our faults. I think it should be an interesting path of discovery this morning. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us. Thanks for patiently waiting for me to show up this morning. I appreciate it. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, and creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Very softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling and tingling, and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now, into this magnificent physical form that enables you to experience life. So welcome. Good morning. So today's topic is strength and weakness, and we often perceive we see faults in ourselves, right? We see things that we consider weaknesses or negative traits that we judge. And I'm inviting everybody to explore what the positive side of those traits might be, because there are polarities, right? Or we create polarities in our perceptions and in our experience. And so, for instance, stubbornness, right? You might perceive yourself as stubborn, or maybe other people tell you you're stubborn. And stubbornness generally carries a negative implication, right? What does it mean if you're stubborn? You're sticking to something. And there we have the positive side, right? Is that the positive side of stubbornness is determination, right? And commitment, and that's a strength, to be able to persist. Good morning, Bernadette. Welcome. So good to have you here with us. So we often hear those two words joined together, stubborn determination, right? So that's where we can recognize the benefit to this particular trait that you might have. And I'm wondering, like what kinds of traits do you have that you judge negatively that we might be able to find, and I believe more than likely that we might be able to find a positive side. So I think the thing that maybe flips something from the positive to the negative, perhaps, is the energy behind it. So determination is, stick-to-itiveness. That's something that comes from or is related to stubbornness. I'm thinking about that particularly and feeling into it. Stubbornness maybe has, as I'm thinking about it, there's a feeling of aggressiveness attached to it in my thinking of it in the moment. That there's a combative feel to it, whereas determination, well, you talk about putting your nose to the grindstone, putting blinders on, and just forging ahead. I guess that has some restriction to it as well, but it doesn't necessarily have to. We don't have to have blinders on to be determined, right? We can be focused, right? We can have clarity and allow that to feed our determination without the obstruction of the stubbornness, perhaps. And it's all linguistic, right? But our language in many respects shapes our experience. So I think it's valid and valuable to be looking at the impact of our language. So Rosalind says, if we receive our desires versus not so readily, the positive side of not having enough money or love helps shift the lack of this external circumstance to redirect someone to look at their values or embody love for self. So let's tease this apart. If we receive our desires versus not so readily. So what I'm thinking you're saying there is, if we stop resisting, then the positive side of not having enough money or love helps shift the lack of this external circumstance to redirect someone to look at their values or embody love for self. That's beautiful. Okay, so what you're talking about is a shift of awareness. So for instance, not having enough money, then shifting our awareness to our value and not valuing ourselves based on money. I'm thinking that's part of what you're saying there, for example. And feeling like not having enough love, you nailed it by saying that we really get to embody love for self. Okay, so that actually made me think of another trait that we can look at, the positives, the strengths and the weaknesses. We might consider ourselves or certain other people selfish because they're only thinking of themselves, big air quotes around that. And we also can recognize that by on a positive note, paying attention to ourselves and our needs is self-care, and helps preserve us to be able to be more generous to others. So what might look like being selfish in a given moment, but from somebody who's not getting what they want, perhaps, from us, maybe what we're doing is caring for ourselves so that we can better care for others. So being self-aware, that's another polarity, being self-aware versus self-absorbed. When we're monitored, and maybe these things are all a matter of degree, perhaps, that selfish versus self-care, they're not necessarily opposite in any way. Perhaps it's a matter of degree or the energy that is behind that attention. So if I'm selfish, the definition would be that I'm thinking of myself, but it doesn't have to be that I think only of myself. And there are moments when we need to choose self-care over being there in certain ways for someone else, because we might be so depleted. You know, we need to replenish ourselves in order to be able to be a contribution, perhaps. So Bernadette says, I would think selfishness would depend on the situation. 100%. And it also, selfishness is also something that depends on the perception of the person judging something as selfish, right? So maybe someone wants me to do something for them and I have other commitments that I need to keep. They might perceive me as selfish for prioritizing my needs over theirs. So I think it's really interesting in this conversation. What's arising for me is, again, how non-black and white things are, right? That that interpretation is contextual, that that the way things occur for us is very, very, very much a function of context. Good morning, Lisa. Welcome, welcome. Good to have you here with us. We're talking about strength and weakness and how they're really part of the same dynamic. What we can perceive with something in excess, right? Something in excess, something good in excess can become a weakness. Like even water, apparently, you could kill yourself with too much water, right? Drinking too much water, apparently. I don't know anybody who's done that. I don't know how much water it would take, but anything in excess, whether, even if it was good to start out with, in excess, it can become damaging. And actually, this strength and weakness kind of thing brings me to think about something that I see a lot in my work with people, and that is people have a behavior that is damaging, that they want to be able to change. And one of the things that's super powerful in approaching these kinds of behaviors is to recognize that initially that behavior had a positive intention. So, for instance, if I were in an abusive environment and I learned to stand up for myself and be defiant, that might have been a positive behavior in the context of that abusive environment. Maybe that's what saved me. Or for other people, perhaps being quiet, not speaking my mind, being really alert to what the temperature of the room was, so to speak. That hypervigilance would be a self-preservation tool, right? And then later in life, it shows up as not being able to stand up, not being able to speak my mind, not being able to assert myself, because it was life. My life was dependent upon not doing that in the past. So what started out as a really positive behavior, a life-saving type behavior, then becomes an impediment, right? Um, being defiant, maybe saved your life. And later in life, it becomes a challenge because you can't choose otherwise necessarily consciously. When we identify the positive intention for the original behavior, it often gives us access to untangling that pattern. And what we can do, this is actually really powerful technique, if you want to call it that, is to then dialogue with that behavior, and to say, hey, you know what, instead of fighting it, instead of trying to deny it, instead of trying to get rid of it, what we can do, and I've seen it be really effective, is to acknowledge that behavior and to say, hey, you know what, I get that you were you had a positive intention, and that initially it was an effective adaptation, an effective behavior, and I really appreciate that. And now it's not so positive anymore. This behavior is not as effective as it was. In fact, it's damaging. Maybe we can reassess together. Like, I get that your intention, obviously we're personifying the behavior, but it's a way that we can have gain some access. I get that your intentions are good and you're wanting to protect me and take care of me. Maybe we can renegotiate this to look at what might be a better approach, what might be more effective given the demands of this moment in time and this part of my evolution. And what happens is, I've seen it over and over, is that the part of our awareness that we're conversing with about this behavior comes up with other solutions. And it's really quite remarkable. So like, let's say, I'm just thinking of compulsive eating, for example. That was something that was very much a part of my zeitgeist. And it's interesting because I've seen echoes of it kind of more recently, interestingly enough. But so for me, compulsive eating was a way for me to neutralize some feelings. People talk about eating your feelings. And it was probably never really great behavior, but it worked for me, I guess, on a certain level, that when I was having really emotionally challenging environment, I could try to soothe myself. Maybe it was also self-soothing by eating something delicious, or finding some kind of pleasure in that. So Bernadette says, I'm an emotional eater. A lot of people are. It's really interesting. Some people lose their appetite when they're emotional. Other people just eat. And I certainly was one of those. And like I said, I still see echoes of that here and there. Anyway, that's a good behavior to start talking to. It's like, okay, wow, I see this behavior. What was the positive intention? Dialogue with it. What were we trying to accomplish? What were you trying to help me with by this pattern of behavior? And then maybe we can make some better choices. Maybe there are other ways to soothe myself. Maybe there are other ways to minimize or to interact with the emotional intensity that can provide comfort, that aren't damaging, because these behaviors can end up being hurtful. Let's say we don't have a lot of financial resources at some point. So as a result, we're really careful to save things, so that they're available when we need them, that we're keeping the things that we might be able to reuse, for example, and repurpose. And then at some point that behavior translates into hoarding, because it was a matter of survival and safety to be saving things, and then that behavior can populate out into kind of a hoarding out of fear of loss. And so then we can talk to that behavior and say, here originally it was a positive behavior. It helped us to have what we needed to be able to get through. And then that behavior kind of ramped up and went wild, and we became more, over the threshold, right? Where it just became a destructive behavior. And so maybe we get to talk to that behavior and say, okay, so what's up with that? What are you trying to accomplish? Now, in that behavior, if you reassess what else might be available, how else might we accomplish that first and initial objective? So while it's a construct to be having this kind of dialogue with yourself or your behavior, your other than conscious awareness that's created this behavior for your betterment, when we can contact the intention, then we can dialogue with that brilliant part of ourselves that's solving all these things for us, and ask it to come forward with a better and more fitting solution for the current circumstance, right? Because it kind of went on autopilot and then ran amok. And so we get to reevaluate it when we bring our awareness to that, when we bring our conscious intention to that. It often enables us to activate that part of ourselves to generate new solutions, which can be a lot more powerful for the present moment. So strength and weakness, right? That perhaps it's a matter of degree, perhaps it's a matter of context that makes the distinction. But I believe very strongly, I mean, I've observed, not that it's true, but it's my current hypothesis and observation, that the seeds of our greatest strengths are found in what we might be perceiving as weaknesses. And it's just a matter of allowing ourselves to get out of our head of judgment enough to be able to create an openness that allows us access to what that strength might be, and how we might be able to redirect ourselves to transform the weakness to strength. So I hope that you're taking a minute to check in with yourself and say, okay, so what are the things that I criticize myself for? And what is the goodness in that? Where can I find that goodness? So Dido, hi Dido, good morning. Great to have you here with us. Dido says, I love this, dialoguing with ourselves like we can with physical pain too. 100% with physical pain is like, what are you trying to communicate to me? What's going on? We have so much of our existence and our lives is takes place on an other than conscious level. If we can find access to that aspect of ourselves, if we can start finding ways to bring that part of ourselves conscious, then things can change. And also we can rely on that inner intelligence, because it's there. It's just a matter of how do we tap it? How do we harness it? And I don't mean harness it because that's constrictive. I mean, how do we engage with it? That's a better way to think of it, I think. Anyway, once again, I so appreciate your engagement in these conversations, and truly you inspire me, and I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that I'm able to return the favor there. I think that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. So please, at 9 a.m. Eastern, and I invite you to check out all the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN, One with the Earth, Enlightened World Living, and so much love and appreciation to you. Until next time.